call this meeting of the House and Children and Family Affairs Subcommittee to order. Haley, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Bricken, Eldridge, Farmer, Gillespie, Harris, Stewart, Chairman Littleton. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I want to welcome the members and the people in the audience here to our meeting today. Are there any, do any of the members have any personal orders? Seeing none, I'm going to take care of a little housekeeping before we get started. By request, the sponsor of item number 6 has House Bill 2418 has been rolled 1 week. By request of the sponsor, item 7, House Bill 1919 has been rolled 1 week. Item number 1, without objection, item number 1 is rolled to the Hill. So now we will move on to our first bill, which is item number 2, House Bill 2163 by Leader Lamberth, which I think Representative Vital is carrying that bill. Properly motioned and second, and I don't think this is your first bill, but maybe your second bill?
It is my second bill.
Well, welcome to Children and Families Affairs. So
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of House Bill 2163, on behalf of the administration. Over 7,000 substantial and substantiated cases are reported annually for investigation by the Department of Children's Services for follow-up. Currently, DCS has 2,800 case managers serving across the state of Tennessee. DCS is required to maintain staffing levels sufficient to limit caseloads to an average of 20 active initial assessment cases or 20 children for ongoing service cases. As introduced, this bill simply specifies that the average caseload for children's services and for case managers must be calculated at least monthly. House Bill 2163 amends TC8 Section 37-5-132 by adding just one word, monthly. This action is recommended by the Comptroller's 2020 audit of the department, which suggested the General Assembly consider identifying the time period the department should use to determine this average. This bill specifies and clarifies the average calculated at least monthly, ensuring that the department remains diligent and consistent in reviewing the caseload and servicing the children of Tennessee. Madam Chair Lady, are there any questions, or are there representatives here from the Department of Children's Services if there's any other things that I can answer?
I really thank you for bringing this bill. We've talked about this for a long time. I've talked with DCS, and I think it's a great bill, and it's much needed, and I hope we can move forward with those cases. I know we need more caseworkers, and we're working on that, but this is definitely a good bill, so thank you for bringing it. Are there any questions for Representative Vital? Questions been called for? Without objection, we'll be voting on House Bill 2163. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. You move out to civil full.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your second bill.
Thank you.
Next, we have item number 3, House Bill 1918 by Chairman Whitson. Properly motion and second. You are recognized.
Thank you,
Chairman
Madam
Whitson.
Chairman, and thank you, committee. My first time ever before this committee.
Well, welcome.
I have 2 bills before the committee, one dealing with death and the other one dealing with marriage. And
They're
you know
about
what
the
they
same.
say? And they say the only difference is you can smell your flowers at one of them. So I hope my wife is not watching right now.
We're going to get a video of that and send it to her.
Thank you, Chair Lady. The first bill, 1918. This bill was brought to me by our local circuit court judges. Currently, only circuit court judges in Davidson County are authorized to appoint a full-time master to serve as a judicial officer in the absence of such judges. This legislation will allow any county in our state, not just Davidson County, to authorize the judges of the circuit and chancery courts to appoint masters to probate those matters that the appropriate judge may direct the master to hear. Approving and funding the position requires the adoption of a resolution by 2/3 of the majority vote of the county legislative body. Persons selected for the position are county employees in regards to pay and benefits. Excuse me. For instance, if approved and funded by the county commission, our circuit court and chancery court judges could allow the appropriate masters to handle the probate docket regarding wills and guardianship. With that, Madam Chairman, I renew my motion.
Are there any questions for Chairman Whitson? Questions? Sorry about, Chairman, do you have a witness that you think you need to speak or would like to speak? He's on the list.
No,
I'm
not
just
today,
asking.
ma'am.
Okay, all right. Question's been called. Is there any, without objection, will be voted on item number 3, House Bill 1918. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. You move out to civil justice.
Thank you,
Cool.
Madam Chairman.
Next, we have item number 4, House Bill 2160 by Chairman Whitson. The one that smells, or?
The one where you can smell your flowers.
There you go. You're properly motioned and second.
Thank you, Madam
Recognized.
Chairman and committee. House Bill 2160. This bill will expand the list of county constitutional officers who have the authority to perform marriages to include court clerks, registers of deeds, trustees, and property assessors. Currently, county mayors and county clerks have the authority to perform marriages, as do county commissioners, judges, and notary publics. This bill came about because someone performed a marriage thinking they had the authority, and actually they did not. This is a permissive bill. It does not require any elected official to perform a marriage ceremony as part of their official duties. It merely provides legal authorization for those who wish to do marriages, and with the same rights and responsibilities as other local officials that already have this authority. The Tennessee County Officials Association supports this bill, and this bill was brought to me by the Tennessee County Trustee Association and the Tennessee County Officials Association. With that, Madam Chairman, I renew my motion.
Members, you've heard the bill. Are there any questions? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? Without objection, we'll be voting for House Bill 2160. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. You move out to
Thank you,
civil
Madam Chairman
justice
and
court.
committee.
Next, we have item number 5, House Bill 1665 by Representative Smith. Properly motioned and second. You are recognized, Representative Smith.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. And this bill is brought to me by our local chancellors, and they, as I understand, have been working with the AOC on the specific legislation. What House Bill 1665 does is it puts into code the parity of how absentee and non-absentee estates are treated, and this is permissive, just as the other bill that preceded. This is a permissive bill. It allows the certain judges to appoint a public receiver in the case of a state that someone believes may have to have management relative to creditors, and to ensure the integrity of the process as well as the integrity of the process of paying off debts and creditors while maintaining the integrity of the estate itself. And again, it being permissive, it's not a requirement, and this does not preclude a person having an opportunity to have their day in court, should that be necessary. But I'll be happy to take questions of the committee.
Are there any questions? Representative Stewart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have you talked to the Bar Association about this? I asked you about all probate matters.
You're recognized.
I have not spoken to any member of the Bar Association. I mean, I did talk to the AOC, and this bill's been on notice now, I want to say for 2 weeks, and have not heard from anyone in the Bar Association.
And the AOC
Representative
is.
Stewart.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. The AOC is fine with it.
I'll
Representative
have to defer to the chairman. I think that this has come up in your chairman's meeting, but to my knowledge, the communication with me from the chancellor who wrote the bill, as well as his communications with the staff at the AOC, is that they were supportive. So I didn't have those firsthand conversations, so I'd rather defer to the committee chairman.
I've not heard anything from anyone about the bill. So.
Okay.
Representative Stewart.
Yeah, I will say, just because this is a very complicated area of law, before we get to the primary committee, I would recommend you kind of put it before the Bar Association, just because they have a whole probate committee that's really has all the top probate lawyers in the state. And I just say that because it's like an area, you know, as a lawyer, it's nothing I understand, and it can be very complex. And I just want to make sure, sounds like a good bill. I just don't want to, you know, push a peg one direction and find out we pushed something out the back end and we didn't think about it, you know.
Representative Smith.
No, and I absolutely welcome anyone to come visit me on the bill. Happy to set an appointment with someone. As I'm reading the bill, literally it adds to public administrator, public guardian, and public trustee the term public receiver in two, actually 3 sections of code. So there are other surrogates that are already listed in code that perform this type of service. It's just that in this particular case, the chancellor or a probate judge would make that determination.
Representative Stewart.
The only thing I would raise, and I just don't know, is receivers, as you know, are responsible for taking money and goods and kind of making significant decisions. It's the only reason I raise it. You know, this is always an area, this area of the law that creates all sorts, it raises all sorts of challenges and sometimes involves massive amounts of money. So anyway, I just raised the issue. I'd like to hear, hopefully at the next committee hearing, that the Bar Association has vetted this and looked at it, because I know their probate group is extremely active and historically has vetted all these bills, so we know what exactly, we know what we're voting on. But thank you.
Representative Smith.
And I will take that recommendation from my colleague. One thing I might just offer as a frame around this particular bill, the reason that this particular chancellor and his colleague, another chancellor in Hamilton County, have offered this legislation is in simply, I would say, some bad behavior of those that have brought an estate before that court, and right now there's not a provision to protect an estate, even in the presence of a will, from the behavior of liquidating assets on a very expedited process, and leaving the family with creditors that maybe should have been paid first. And so that, and again, in my layman's terms, as I'm understanding being the non-attorney, these two chancellors have witnessed lawyers coming to that court petitioning on behalf of a more financed creditor when other creditors are owed finances first, maybe in a judgment, and then the estate being left still in I guess, disarray, and this just allows a chancellor to intervene a little sooner on making that appointment. So not to be argumentative, but I want to make sure that there's no intention here of precluding someone a fair hearing, but I think that this is something that has come about because of some bad behavior. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Representative Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And no doubt, you know, because that's why I raise it, because, right, you know, these can be some of the most contested, bitterly fought out, protracted pieces of litigation that ever exist in any court. Right. I don't do it, thank goodness. I know the people who do in this town, and it's just very involved. And so that's the reason I raise it, but I appreciate you looking at it. Thank you.
Representative Smith.
I commit to taking appointments with the Bar Association. Thank you.
In my experience, they find you, but Representative Ricken.
I think our Representative Stewart kind of covered most of my concerns, and certainly because I had to kind of looking at it was concerned with would the party be bonded, insured or not that are these public receivers, and without looking at the details of the legislation, and I couldn't make that out. So,
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And to my colleague's question, I'll be happy to allow one of the legal to read from the code, you know, how public receivers are determined. But as it has been related to me, carrying a bill for the two chancellors in Hamilton County, these are individuals that are not random. They are absolutely somehow tied into the court and the court system. And in talking with the clerk and master of Hamilton County, I don't think this would be just a random individual that would be placed in such a weighty matter. I think that these would be people that would be conversant with mastery of the law and have some bonding as you recommend. But again, I'll be happy to go out of session and allow the legal analyst to give us a definition and code what this looks like.
We're out of session for legal.
Michelle Fogarty, Legal Services. The bill allows the court to appoint a public receiver to determine the need for a temporary or permanent receiver. So the public receiver will just submit a report with its recommendations to the court, and then the court will decide whether or not to appoint a temporary or permanent receiver. So the public receiver is just making a report, doing an investigation and reporting to the court. Now, a receiver that's appointed by the court has the same powers as those who are receivers in an absentee estate, and they are required to be bonded.
Representative Brickett, any more questions for legal? Anyone else have a question for legal? We are back in session. Representative Smith?
I would just say thank you
Representative
to
Smith, you're
legal for taking a very inartful presentation and summing it up nicely. Thank you so much.
Any more questions? Questions been called. Any without objection will be voted on House Bill 1665. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. You go out to civil justice full.
Thank you so much, committee and chairman.
And that brings us back to the heel of the calendar. And I'm going to hand the gavel off to Chairman Farmer.
All right. Let's see here. Thank you. Yeah, we're on item 1, folks, and I apologize. Had to get my bearings straight here. House Bill 2145 by, looks like Leader Lamberth and Chair Lady Littleton. So do I have a motion in a second? Perfect. You're recognized, Chair Lady.
Thank you, Chairman. This is called the Tennessee Foster's Hope. It's the administrative bill from the governor's office for, of course, foster care. And Part 1 is the extension of foster care services. The first part of the bill will expand eligibility for the extension of foster care services, a wraparound service program for young adults still in DCS custody when they turn 18. Eligibility will be expanded to include full-time employment and non-credit bearing vocational training programs. You'll remember that the current law, the current eligibility is limited to the enrollment in school or the work readiness program, and this expansion is expected to serve over 300 additional youth. The expansion will also will allow youth who choose to work full-time instead of going to college the opportunity to remain engaged in critical DCS wraparound services. So these are children that have been in DCS custody, and if they, in the past, if they didn't go to a college, then they just were out on their own. They had no service or anything. So this will give them, if they want to go to work or go into a secondary school, then they can still receive the services and still be in the foster care system. So Part 2 is to reimburse from the relative caregiver placements. This bill will allow DCS to pay a per diem to a relative caregivers instead of placing the child into full custody. DCS does not currently reimburse caregivers who assume custody of a child they are related to, and this prevents many of the relative caregivers from accepting this responsibility, resulting in the child going into full custody at the full daily foster care rate. Under the proposal, DCS will reimburse relative caregivers at 50% of the daily foster care board rate for the level of care assigned to the child. So we have a lot of children that the grandparents, they go into grandparents' care, and I've even had some great-grandparents take in their children. So this will give them a better opportunity when they're living on their Social Security. They can take the child in and take care of it, and it still be in the family. So these are good things that are going on in the foster care program.
And thank you for that. Members, do we have any questions for Chair Lady Littleton? Representative Eldridge, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question, just to clarify, but these kids, they've come, there's a court order that they're in DCS custody, is that correct?
No,
You're recognized.
they are not in custody. This is to keep them out of custody. They just go into the caregiver.
And I guess I may have misstated that. The parents, the parents are just not in the picture. Are they in the legal system, or?
Yeah, I guess he's asking maybe logistically, how does this work? You know,
Yeah,
if you
just-
know.
They're children that have, yes, their parents are not taking care of them. So they're either abused or neglected. And so to keep them out of the system, the state custody, they just go to a caregiver if we can find one.
Okay. And I guess the reason I asked that, you know, I've had situations up around in our area where the parent just kind of walks away from the child. They drop it off at the grandmother's house, and maybe they have a drug issue or something like that, and they just kind of walked away. It's not something that the court has ordered or anything. So would that grandparent qualify under this as well as say someone who the parent maybe has been convicted of a crime and the child has to go into some type of DCS custody?
Charlie Littleton.
I think you're correct. I've read reports where parents cannot take care of their children, and they leave them with a caregiver, a grandparent or a mother or, a sister, and they cannot take care of them. They don't have the money, and they have to turn them back into DCS because they cannot take care of the child themselves on their own. So this would give those people, they can apply for the foster care, this program, and they would get 50% of what a foster care person.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Members, any follow-up questions for our chair lady? Seeing none, looks like we're ready. Oh, Representative Bricken, you recognize her.
I'm trying to formulate a question, but I'm somewhat concerned without that the DCS will kind of use this in maybe an overreaching umbrella of putting children with caregivers that are kind of on the margin just for the financial benefit of it. And so I just don't know how that is going to be monitored or modeled. And so I apologize my thoughts on this, but it's just kind of something about this just bothers me from a financial credibility standpoint. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Can I
Chair
speak
lady?
just one
Yes,
thing, and
yes,
then
ma'am.
if he's not satisfied, we can call DCS?
Absolutely.
Okay. It says that the relative caregiver has been awarded custody by the child, of the child by a final order of a court, so they would go before a judge. And the parents have to be, or the caregiver would have to satisfy screening and training requirements set out by DCS to ensure the safety of the child. So we've read reports where, like I said earlier, that caregivers bring the children to DCS or to court, or I've read reports where they even take them to police officers where they want the child, but they can't take care of them because they don't have enough money to do that. So this would leave the caregiver a leadway to keep that child instead of it going into custody. And it's already being properly taken care of. There's just not enough money for diapers and formula and all those things.
Representative Bricken.
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of good situations. I'm just worried about how it gets abused in the system. And I don't know, I just feel like this is going to generate, probably like any growing bureaucratic program, abuse out there. And I just hopefully the controls are in place to monitor it properly. So I'll leave it at that.
Charlie Littleton, you recognize.
It happens when they're in state custody as well. And this is kind of a pilot program to kind of see how this works and if it is effective. So it is a pilot program, but it happens in the foster care system just as well. So there's just too many bad apples out there, and we don't know where they're at until they do something wrong.
And members, any other questions for Chair Lady? I had a couple things I wanted to run by. I had just as great questions, by the way. You say this is like a pilot program. Does this have a sunset on it? Is this sunset in like a year or two? Usually when we test something out, and I think I have the same concerns maybe Representative Bricken has. Are we going to have to where people will be taking advantage of this situation on the foster care and be collecting this money? Is there a federal, state match? I mean, how are these dollars being paid? Where are they coming from? Where's the oversight on it? Right. These are things that and DCS came to see me, but all this just came to me as these good questions came up today. So I hate to.
It's fine. Could we go out of session and
Yeah.
talk to DCS?
Members, does anybody have any objection? We're going out of session. We'll have the department up here, and maybe we can ask them these questions. Okay, very good. So we're going to go out of session without objection. Ma'am, if you would, and I think you know the drill, be sure your red light's on there, and you can adjust your microphone to where we can hear you, and just introduce yourself, and then we're going to open it up for some questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Valerie Yancey with Governor Lee's legislative office. And the chair lady really has gotten this down pat. She has a very strong understanding of this. So these are not children that are in the state's custody at all. They have not come into our custody. They would be, and the state wouldn't necessarily even know they were out there because they had not been brought to the attention of the department. So these would be a situation where a mother or a father has gotten in trouble. A judge has said you are not a fit parent, but the judge does not want that child to come into state custody yet. The child is you're trying to avoid bringing them into state custody altogether. So you have a relative, a grandmother, a mother, aunt or uncle, even an older brother or sister, as long as they're over 21, can say, we don't want this child to come into state custody, we want them with the family. So that relative steps up. Now, I have heard the question once, excuse me, about if you had a bad actor, if you had a relative that was just trying to make money off of relatives. And I mean, I'm sure there are people out there that could possibly think that direction, but you're talking about $15 a day per child. It is not a lot of money, because they're only going to get half the amount that a foster parent would get if the child has come into custody. So you're looking at it's like $15 in pennies a day that they would get for that child in order to keep that child from coming into the system. And as I'm sure all of y'all know, if a child actually comes into DCS custody, that is a whole nother level of issues to deal with. So this is just a way to help keep that child, hopefully with a loving family member. I mean, that is certainly the goal, to have that child with a loving family member rather than becoming a ward of the state. Does that answer, or did I just totally run around the question?
Members? Representative Bricken?
All right, let's just, the court decides to place a child with a relative.
Yes, sir.
The relative says fine. Is DCS role strictly the financial conduit only for the program? And how does the child, is there any monitoring to say that the financial need a year from there changes, or does it just go on till he's 18 or 21 without any annual review of the
Sure.
situation?
Sure.
You're
No, I mean,
recognized.
I'm
Good.
so sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Thank you. No, there are guardrails in place, so you're not just writing a blank check or giving $15 without any kind of restrictions. So in the bill itself, first of all, the relative caregiver has to be 21 years of age or older. I know that's not the direction you're going, but that is one of the guardrails. There is a total household income does not exceed twice the current federal poverty guidelines based on the size of the family. So if you have, if I were to take in a relative, I would not qualify for getting $15 a day to help take care of that child. So you have that as part of it. The child cannot be in a home where there is one of the parents, so you can't kind of do a back door. That's being checked out by the department. And then the department also contracts with, like, youth villages. I mean, that's just one that's at the top of my head. They contract out with people that will be making sure this child is taken care of. So they're still not in the custody of the state, but you still have the guardrails in place to make sure this is not just a slush fund for a family in perpetuity.
Representative Bricken, any follow-up, sir? No. Members? Representative Harris, you're on the list.
Okay, so thank you, Chairman. So I kind of see where Representative Bricken is coming from. So even if it's a grandparent, and I know a lot of grandparents who are taking care of a grandchild or something, so, but they also live in the home, so they wouldn't qualify for this if they live in the home with that parent.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Very good. Members, any additional questions? And I just have a couple. So logistically, how does this work? As Representative Bricken hit on, you may have said it, and I apologize if you have to say it again, but so how would these kids end up in an approved foster care home, logistically?
You mean in a relative caregiver home?
Relative,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
relative caregiver home.
Yes,
How
sir.
does that happen?
So the court would make that declaration. And then that caregiver would petition or apply, I guess, through DCS to be able to get this stipend. I mean, I've heard it called stipend. I've heard it called several different things. But the family member would petition to DCS, and then DCS would go through the process to make sure all of these checks are made, counting off everything is done by the way it is set up. The department does have rule-making authority under this bill, which means they would come before the Government Operations Committee to make sure that the Government Operations Committee is good with what they're putting in place. So they would put in these guardrails that have to be met, guidelines that would have to be met before then there would be a check issued, a daily check issued. And I'm not sure if they do that monthly, probably monthly. It's monthly. But usually the contractors like youth villages or any others would be the ones that actually would interact with that family member
So,
to make the payments.
so if I'm understanding this correctly, so if we pass this piece of legislation, then the department's going to come to GovOps to ask to say, look, here's our proposed mechanism and way we're going to do this, and our oversight, and our to be sure that we're going to get done what needs to be done.
Yes,
Is
sir,
that what
through
you're
the
saying?
rulemaking process. Yes, sir, just like it
Okay.
is with anything else.
So, and then you're going to let them know what sort of oversight do you plan to have with this? How are we going to have? Is the General Assembly or Legislature, are you going to come back in a year or every 6 months or 3 months and let us know, how it's going? Like what?
There actually
kinda-
is a report that is required to be issued, so you all can see the yearly totals. It would be awesome if 10 years from now, we don't even need the program, but that's not typically how child care works. So, but you will be receiving a yearly report that will be filed.
Right. All right. Representative Bricken, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What other states have any programs similar to this? And can you report their experience or not?
You recognize, ma'am.
Representative Bricken, I was trying really hard to be sure I had every answer ready for you all. If I could look over my shoulder at the department, I don't have that answer, and I'm so sorry, but we have, one of the liaisons that is on the list to speak, Jim Lehman.
And generally, if you don't have that, I think Chair Lady Littleton would be happy to, if you want to send that to her, if you can't get it today, and she'll give it to us or whatnot. But, sir, yeah,
With the Department of Children's Services.
there you go.
Sorry, Jim Lehman with the Department of Children's Services. We are not aware at this time of other states that are doing, but we're happy to take a look into that and let the committee know if we find out other states are doing this as well.
Representative Bricken, any follow-up? Representative Harris?
Thank you, Chairman. So usually DCS moves a little bit faster than the parents or grandparents will in this process. Is there a time frame in which will allow if a grandparent wants to go through this process, to allow them to get their affairs in order to make this happen before DCS takes custody?
You recognize.
Yes, sir. I mean, the grandparent or whoever the caregiver is would actually have to come to us. We're not going to be out there searching court records to see if a child is staying with a family member, unless there is some kind of a reason that has taken place. So we're not going to be like, I guess Big Brother's not the best way to say it, but we're not going to be looking for people just to give them money. They actually have to make an application to the department. So if you had a family member that thought they could make it happen, they thought they could do it on their own, and a year later they come back and say, I really cannot do this, or their financial position has changed, they can come to the department then. Yes, sir.
Any follow-up?
And will the funds from this come from the federal 4E funds or from just state funds?
You recognize.
On the relative caregiver portion, that comes from state funds. I mean, this is one of the beautiful parts of what we're able to do right now to help others. This was in the governor's speech, that this is going to be funds coming from the state legislature. Now, I want to clarify, though, that on the extension of foster services, which is the other part of this bill, that does involve some federal funds. There's a match on that, but this is strictly state.
Any follow-up? Thank you. Very good. And I've just got two more things, and I'm going to be quiet. One, I think members historically want to make sure that we don't start something that we can't finish 10 years down the road or 3 years down the road or whatever, right? So since these are state dollars, I mean, I think that's where the concern's coming from the committee there. And then is the policy behind this that you think that giving this stipend to relative caregivers is going to cause more, or going to help them, encourage them to take care of more children? Is that the policy behind this?
May I?
Yes, you recognize.
Thank you. Again, at $15 a day, that is not enough of a financial incentive, in my opinion, and it is just my opinion, but I don't think you're going to have a grandparent out there saying, well, yes, I'm happy to take 8 of my grandchildren just so I can get that small portion. Of course, there are people out there that might look at it that way. I will say that funding of this is going to be dependent on appropriations. So right now, this is the money that's going into the budget. But if we do hit, or when we hit a very bad budget year, this, like any other item in the budget, is always going to be subject to budget cuts.
Right. And have we had relative caregivers that's asked for this, or I'm just kind of curious how this came about?
If I may, in my time working with administrations, there has long been conversations from relative caregivers saying, we need help. And they understand that if the child came into state custody, there'd be more resources for them. At the same time, they don't want the grandchild or their niece or nephew or whoever the relative is. They don't want them to come into state custody, because obviously that brings on a whole nother ballgame on how you have to work with that child, or how you end up working with that child. A good caregiver, a good relative, is really going to want to do everything they can, because that is their relative. And that's certainly our hope. We've got a lot of good relatives out there that are taking care of their grandchildren or relatives, and they just could really use a little bit more help. The price of formula and price of diapers and price of gasoline to take them to school is exploding. And a lot of these families have never had the ability to get just a little more to help care for their relative in these situations.
Very good. Members, any additional questions? Representative Bricken, you recognize, sir.
Just last comment. I really wish this legislation was in 2 bills, one with the foster care extension and one with the relative care, because the extension, I'm clear on. The relative care, I think it's got a lot of good things, but I'm really concerned that we're opening up, and you can do $15 a day or $450 a month, and you can do the math on up, but it's the numbers that I'm afraid will explode on this, and if we're not careful. So I'll leave it at that.
Very good. Oh, you can respond.
If I may, just add one more thing. So if a relative caregiver just can't do it, they simply don't have the ability to take care of this child, that child can come into state custody. You know, there are certainly ways to do it. So if that child comes into state custody, that relative is out of it. And, you know, then we deal from that point on that this child is now a ward of the state while they're in state custody. So that's just next. We will have someone come by and spend a little bit more time with you so they can go into far more detail than I can. Thank you.
Members have any other questions for our witnesses before we go back in session? All right, seeing none. Thank you both. All right. We're back in session. We have any questions for our chair lady? I think we explored this fairly well. Chair Lady Littleton, you're recognized.
I have just a couple of things to say. Foster care is not perfect either. And so I think if we could find, and I'm the first to say that sometimes we give them to relatives that are worse than the parents themselves. So I think with this, it being a start off or new, and they can stay in a home and actually give them a little bit of money to give the decent ones, but they have to pass a test before they get those children. So they have to go through some security type things, and it's all in here, and I don't remember all of it. But there are 3 states that have it. Florida, Arizona, and Ohio do have the same program. So there are 3, so we would be the 4th state that does this. And maybe if we put a sunset on it or the pilot, but I think it's a good program that has a lot of good things that we can do to keep children out of custody.
Yeah, that's very
We want
good.
them to go back home. We definitely want that if they can. And if they can't, if they can be with a grandparent or aunt or uncle, I mean, it's a beginning for them.
Very good. Members, any additional questions for our sponsor? Seeing none, looks like we're ready to vote to send House Bill 2145 to Civil Justice Full Committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Ayes have it. Bill moves on. And I want to hand the gavel back down to our chair lady here.
All right, are there any other announcements? Anything anyone wants to say? If not, I hear a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned.